A Millionaire CEO offered me $2.5 million for one night. I said yes, but his secret left me speechless. My name is Hope Mitchell, and accepting that proposal was the decision that changed my life forever. I need you to understand something about desperation. Real desperation isn't dramatic like in the movies. It's quiet, persistent, like a constant ache in your chest that never goes away. It's counting quarters for gas money while your little sister is fighting for her life 3 floors above you in Chicago Memorial Hospital. It's working 3 different cleaning jobs and still falling short every single month. That's where I was at 28 years old, drowning in medical bills and running out of hope. I remember that night so clearly it still takes my breath away. October 15th, 2024. It was a Tuesday, which meant I was scheduled to clean the Harrison Sterling Tower starting at midnight. Most people think cleaning office buildings is mindless work, but when you're doing it at 3 in the morning in a 40-story skyscraper, every shadow feels alive. Every sound echoes like a gunshot. I'd been cleaning corporate buildings for 5 years, ever since Lily got diagnosed with leukemia. 3 jobs: the Harrison Sterling Tower on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the Millennium Plaza on weekends, and a small accounting firm downtown every other weeknight. The math never worked out right, though. Lily's treatment cost more than I could make, no matter how many hours I worked. That particular night, I was exhausted beyond words. I'd just come from my evening shift at the accounting firm, grabbed a sandwich from a gas station, my dinner, and headed straight to Harrison Sterling. The security guard, Marcus, knew me well enough by then. He'd just nod and wave me through, sometimes asking about Lily. Good man, Marcus. One of the few people who treated me like I was human instead of invisible. The Harrison Sterling Tower was different from my other jobs. Everything was marble and mahogany, floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the entire city sprawling out below. I always saved the executive floors for last because they were the most intimidating. All those corner offices with their leather chairs and paintings that probably cost more than I'd make in a lifetime. I was on the 38th floor when it happened. The presidential suite, Maxwell Harrison Sterling's personal office. I wasn't supposed to be there that late, but I'd fallen behind schedule because I'd spent 20 minutes in the bathroom crying over the latest bill from the hospital. Lily needed a new round of treatments, and my insurance had denied the claim. Again. So there I was, mopping the marble floor outside his office, when I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Someone was inside. My first instinct was to run. I figured it was a burglar, or maybe security doing rounds I didn't know about. But then I heard something that stopped me cold. Quiet. Sobbing. Someone else was crying. And it wasn't the soft, defeated kind of crying I knew so well. This was angry, frustrated sobbing. I should have left. I should have packed up my supplies and finished the floor in the morning. But something about that sound, maybe because I recognized the desperation in it, made me push open the office door. The first thing I noticed was how enormous the office was. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 2 walls, giving a view of Lake Michigan that probably cost more to look at than most people's homes. The second thing I noticed was the man sitting behind the massive desk, head in his hands, surrounded by scattered papers. Maxwell Harrison Sterling was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd seen his picture in business magazines, always perfectly groomed, confident, untouchable. But the man in front of me looked broken. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his dark hair was disheveled, and when he looked up at me with those steel-gray eyes, I saw something I recognized immediately, the kind of fear that comes when you're out of options. "Who are you?" he asked, but not in an angry way, more like he was genuinely curious about this interruption to his private breakdown. I should have apologized and left, but instead I found myself saying, "I'm Hope. I clean your building." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was here. I can come back tomorrow." But he didn't dismiss me. Instead, he stared at me for a long moment, taking in my worn cleaning uniform, my red-rimmed eyes. The medical bills I'd forgotten were still clutched in my free hand. "You've been crying too," he said softly. That's when I completely fell apart. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the way he said it without judgment. But suddenly I was sobbing in front of this billionaire CEO, telling him about Lily, about the insurance denials, about how I was failing the only family I had left. He listened to everything, didn't interrupt, didn't look at his watch, didn't treat me like I was wasting his time. When I finally stopped talking, He was quiet for so long I thought he'd forgotten I was there. Then he said something that paralyzed my world. "What if I told you I could give you exactly what you need? $2.5 million tonight." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative was screaming. Right. And what would I have to do for that kind of money? His answer changed everything. "Pretend to be my fiancé for one night." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. But his face was deadly serious. "I need someone to convince some very dangerous people that I have something important to lose. Someone I care about. If they think I'm alone in this world, they'll kill me tonight." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather, made my skin crawl. But $2.5 million was exactly what Lily needed. Exactly. "You're serious," I whispered. "Dead serious," he replied. And something about the way he emphasized dead told me he meant it literally. That's how I found myself agreeing to the most insane proposal of my life, thinking I was just helping a desperate billionaire avoid some business rivals. I had no idea I was about to walk into my own family's darkest secrets, or that the dangerous men he was talking about would recognize me as one of their own. You know that moment when you're standing at the edge of a cliff, and every rational part of your brain is screaming at you to step back, but your heart is telling you to jump. That's exactly where I found myself sitting in Maxwell Harrison Sterling's office at 3:30 in the morning, staring at a man who just offered me more money than I'd see in 10 lifetimes, $2.5 million. The number kept bouncing around in my head like a pinball machine going haywire. It was exactly, and I mean exactly, what Lily needed for her experimental treatment. The treatment that could save her life. The treatment our insurance had denied 3 times, calling it investigational and not medically necessary. Tell that to a 23-year-old girl who's been fighting leukemia for 5 years. "I need to understand something," I said, my voice still shaky from crying. "You're telling me you'll give me $2.5 million just to pretend to be your girlfriend for one night?" Maxwell leaned back in his chair, and I caught a glimpse of the man I'd seen in those business magazines. Controlled. Calculating. But the fear was still there, lurking behind those gray eyes like a caged animal. "Fiancé," he corrected. "And it's not just pretending, these people. They're thorough. They'll have done their research on me. They know I don't have family, don't have anyone close. If they think I'm truly alone, if they believe I have nothing to lose." He trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. "Who are these people?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "Sebastian Blackwood." The name came out like he was spitting out poison. "Ever heard of him?" I shook my head, but something cold settled in my stomach. Even living in my small world of hospital visits and cleaning supplies, you heard whispers about certain names in Chicago. Names you didn't say out loud. Maxwell pulled out his phone and showed me a newspaper article. The headline read, "Pharmaceutical Executive Found Dead in Lake Michigan." The photo showed a man in his 50s. Well-dressed, smiling at some charity event. He looked normal, harmless. "Richard Kovac," Maxwell said quietly. "He refused to do business with Blackwood 3 months ago. They found him last week." My mouth went dry. "And you think this Blackwood wants to do business with you?" "I know he does. He's been pressuring pharmaceutical companies across the Midwest to partner with his distribution network. Companies that refuse," he gestured at the phone screen. I stared at the article, trying to process what he was telling me. This wasn't some corporate rivalry or hostile takeover. This was life and death. And somehow, I was being asked to play a part in it. "Why would having a fiancé make a difference?" I asked. "Because men like Blackwood understand leverage," Maxwell said. "If he thinks I have someone I care about, someone who could be hurt, he might be more diplomatic in his approach. Give me time to find another solution." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I thought about Lily, lying in that hospital bed, getting weaker every day while I worked myself to death trying to save her. I thought about the stack of medical bills on my kitchen table, the calls from debt collectors, the way the doctors looked at me with pity when I asked about payment plans. What exactly would I have to do? I heard myself asking. Maxwell's relief was palpable. "The meeting is tonight. Well, later tonight, 7 p.m. at my penthouse. You'd need to look the part, act like we're in love, convince them that you're important to me. And after that, you get your money and you never see me again." It sounded simple. Too simple. But $2.5 million. God. With that money, Lily could get the treatment she needed. We could pay off all the medical debt, maybe even move somewhere nicer, somewhere she could recover without worrying about anything except getting better. I don't know how to be a socialite, I said weakly. I don't know how to act rich. I'll help you, Maxwell said quickly. I'll get you clothes, jewelry, whatever you need. I'll coach you on what to say, how to act. You just need to convince them for a few hours that you love me and that I love you. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a woman who cleaned up other people's messes for a living, being asked to clean up the biggest mess of this billionaire's life. Why me? I asked. You could hire an actress, a model, someone who actually knows how to do this. Maxwell was quiet for a long moment. Because they'd check, he said finally. Blackwood's people are thorough. They'll look into my life. Try to verify our relationship. An actress or model would have a digital footprint, a history they could trace. But you, he gestured around his office. You work here. You have access to my building, my schedule. It would be believable that we met, that we fell in love. There was something else, though, something he wasn't saying. I could see it in the way he looked at me, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. You're scared, I said. It wasn't a question. Terrified, he admitted. I've built this company from nothing, and now some gangster wants to turn it into a front for his drug operation. If I say yes, I become part of something that destroys lives. If I say no, you end up like Richard Kovac. Yeah, I thought about Lily again, about the way she smiled even when the chemo made her sick, about how she never complained, never asked why this was happening to her. She just kept fighting, day after day, trusting that I would find a way to save her. Okay, I said, and the word felt like jumping off that cliff. I'll do it. Maxwell's entire body sagged with relief. Thank you, he whispered. Hope, you have no idea what this means to me. But as I sat there in his enormous office, surrounded by luxury I'd never dreamed of, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a deal with the devil himself, not Maxwell. He seemed like a decent man caught in an impossible situation. No, the real devil was waiting for us at 7 p.m., and I had no idea that walking into that meeting would mean walking into my own past. I also had no idea that Sebastian Blackwood had been looking for me for 23 years. If someone had told me that morning I'd be standing in a billionaire's penthouse, wearing a dress that cost more than my annual salary, I would have recommended they check themselves into a psychiatric hospital. But there I was at 5 p.m., staring at my reflection in Maxwell's bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at me. The transformation had been surreal. After leaving his office that morning, I'd gone home to my tiny studio apartment, the same one I'd shared with Lily before her latest hospitalization, and tried to sleep. But how do you sleep when you've just agreed to con the most dangerous man in Chicago? Instead, I'd lain awake staring at the water stain on my ceiling, wondering if I'd completely lost my mind. Maxwell had sent a car for me at noon. Not just any car, a Blacktown car with a driver who called me Miss Mitchell, and treated me like I actually mattered. The shopping trip that followed was like stepping into someone else's life. Nordstrom, Neiman Marcus, boutiques I'd only seen from the outside while walking to my bus stop. Personal shoppers who fussed over me like I was some kind of celebrity. We need something elegant but not flashy, Maxwell had told the stylist. She needs to look like she belongs in my world, but not like she's trying too hard. Standing there in his penthouse, I had to admit they'd succeeded. The midnight blue dress hugged my curves in all the right places, and the heels made my legs look longer than they had any right to. My hair, usually pulled back in a messy ponytail, had been styled into soft waves that framed my face. The makeup artist had done something magical with concealer that hid the exhaustion I'd been carrying for 5 years. But underneath all the expensive clothes and professional styling, I was still Hope Mitchell. The girl who counted quarters for gas money. The girl who was about to lie to killers. You look beautiful, Maxwell said from behind me, and I jumped. I hadn't heard him come into the room. When I turned around, my breath caught. He'd changed too, trading his wrinkled business suit for a perfectly tailored charcoal gray one that made his eyes look almost silver. His hair was styled now, and he looked every inch the powerful CEO I'd seen in those magazine photos. But when he looked at me, something in his expression was different. softer. "I feel like I'm wearing a costume," I admitted. "You are," he said gently. "We both are. The question is, can you play the part?" He spent the next hour coaching me. How to hold a wine glass, how to stand next to him, how to look at him like I was madly in love. That last part was easier than I expected, which scared me a little. There was something about Maxwell that drew me in. Maybe it was the vulnerability I'd seen in his office, or the way he looked at me like I was actually worth something. "Remember," he said as we practiced our fake love story, "we met 6 months ago when you were working late in my building. I was having trouble sleeping and went to the office. You were cleaning, we started talking, and I was charmed by your honesty and strength." "How romantic," I said dryly, but there was truth in it that made my chest tight. "A billionaire falls for the cleaning lady. Very pretty woman. Except this is real life," Maxwell said, and something in his voice made me look at him more closely. "And you're not Julia Roberts." "Thanks for the confidence boost," I muttered, but he caught my hand. "What I mean is," he said quietly, "you're better than that. You're real. You're fighting for someone you love. Working 3 jobs, never giving up. That's not something you see a lot in my world." The way he said it made my heart do something strange. For a moment, I forgot this was all pretend. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like if a man like Maxwell Harrison Sterling actually fell for a woman like me. Then reality crashed back in. "What if they don't believe us?" I asked. "They will," Maxwell said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "They have to." At 6:45, Maxwell's phone buzzed. "They're here," he said, his face going pale. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse and felt my stomach drop. 3 black SUVs were parked in front of the building, and men in expensive suits were getting out. Even from 43 floors up, they looked dangerous. "Remember?" Maxwell said, taking my hand. "Your name is Hope Mitchell Thompson. We've been engaged for 3 months. You're nervous about meeting my business associates. But you love me and you're trying to be supportive." "Thompson," I asked, "in case they run a background check, it's better if your last name is different from what they might find." That should have been my first clue that this was about more than just business pressure, but I was too nervous to think clearly. Maxwell's penthouse was like something out of a magazine. All modern furniture and original artwork, with a view of Chicago that made you feel like you were on top of the world. He'd set up drinks and appetizers, trying to make it look like a casual dinner with colleagues instead of what it really was. A performance that could save or end his life. When the doorbell rang, my heart started pounding so hard I was sure Maxwell could hear it. "You're going to be fine," he whispered, squeezing my hand. "Just remember, you love me, and you're proud to be here with me." The strange thing was, as he opened the door and I heard voices in the hallway, part of me realized I wasn't entirely acting anymore. Somewhere in the last 12 hours, something real had started growing between us. Something that scared me more than any gangster ever could. Because falling for Maxwell Harrison Sterling was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when Lily was counting on me to stay focused. Not when $2.5 million hung in the balance, but as I heard footsteps approaching the living room, as I prepared to meet the man who wanted to destroy everything Maxwell had built. I had no idea I was about to come face to face with my own grandfather, a grandfather who'd been searching for me for 23 years. The first thing I noticed about Sebastian Blackwood was his eyes. They were the same shade of green as mine, which should have been my first warning that something was terribly wrong, but I was too busy trying not to hyperventilate to notice family resemblances. He walked into Maxwell's penthouse like he owned it, which maybe he did in some twisted way. Sebastian was probably in his 60s, but he carried himself like a man half his age, silver hair perfectly styled, expensive suit that probably cost more than my car, and an aura of controlled violence that made every instinct I had scream, "Run." Behind him came 2 men who looked like they bench-pressed small cars for fun. They didn't introduce themselves, just positioned themselves by the door like human guardrails. The message was clear. Nobody was leaving until Sebastian said so. "Maxwell," Sebastian said, his voice carrying just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Sebastian," Maxwell replied, and I could feel the tension radiating off him in waves. His hand found mine, squeezing tight enough to cut off circulation. "I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Hope." That's when Sebastian's eyes landed on me, and everything changed. I've tried to describe that moment 1,000 times since then, but words never do it justice. Imagine being struck by lightning while falling off a cliff while discovering you've been living someone else's life. Sebastian's face went from politely interested to shocked, to something that looked like he'd seen a ghost. He actually stumbled backward a step, catching himself on the back of Maxwell's leather sofa. "Impossible," he whispered, staring at me like I was going to disappear if he blinked. Maxwell and I exchanged glances. This wasn't in the script. "Sebastian," Maxwell said carefully, "are you all right?" But Sebastian wasn't listening to Maxwell anymore. His eyes were locked on my face, scanning every feature like he was memorizing them. The way he looked at me made my skin crawl. Not in a creepy way, but in a way that suggested he knew something about me that I didn't know about myself. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hope," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hope Mitchell Thompson?" The last name rolled off my tongue easily enough. We'd practiced it for an hour, but something about the way Sebastian's eyes widened told me I'd just said something monumentally important. "Mitchell," he repeated, and now his voice was shaking. "Hope Mitchell." "Yes," I said, confused and getting more scared by the second. "Is there a problem?" Sebastian didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, and for a terrifying moment I thought he was going for a gun, but what he pulled out was worse than any weapon. A photograph. His hands were trembling as he held it up, comparing it to my face. Even from where I stood, I could see it was an old picture. The colors faded with age. It showed a young woman with dark hair and green eyes laughing at the camera. "Rebecca," he whispered, and the name hit me like a physical blow. "Rebecca, my mother's name." "I'm sorry," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "Did you say Rebecca?" "My daughter," Sebastian said, and his voice cracked on the word. "My beautiful daughter who ran away 28 years ago, who I've been searching for ever since." The world tilted sideways. I actually had to grab Maxwell's arm to keep from falling down. "That's impossible," I said. My mother died in an accident when I was 5. A house fire. She didn't have any family." Sebastian's laugh was bitter and broken. "No accident," he said. "Rebecca was murdered by the Kozlov family when they discovered who she was. They burned down the safe house where she was hiding with you. But somehow," he looked at me with wonder, "somehow you survived." I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was spinning, and everything I thought I knew about my life was crumbling around me. "You're lying," I whispered. "My mother's name was Rebecca Mitchell. She was alone. She didn't have family." "Rebecca Blackwood," Sebastian corrected gently. "She was my only child. And you." He stepped closer, and I could see tears in those green eyes that looked so much like mine. "You're my granddaughter." Maxwell's hand tightened on mine, anchoring me to reality, but reality had just become a nightmare. "No," I said, shaking my head. "No, that's not possible. I'm nobody. I'm just a cleaning lady from the South Side. I don't come from—" I gestured around Maxwell's expensive penthouse. "From this world. Your mother ran away when I tried to arrange her marriage to the son of a rival family," Sebastian continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "She was 18, headstrong, idealistic. She thought she could make it on her own, away from the family business." His voice grew sad. "I let her go because I loved her, because I thought she'd come back when she realized how dangerous the world could be for a young woman alone." The photograph in his hand showed a girl who looked exactly like me at 18. Same eyes, same smile, same stubborn set to her jaw. "She never came back," Sebastian said quietly. "And when I finally tracked her down 7 years later, I was too late. The house was burned to the ground. They told me everyone inside had died, including a 5-year-old girl. But I didn't die," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "No," Sebastian said, and for the first time since he'd walked into the room, he smiled. "You didn't die. You survived, and you grew up to be exactly like her. Strong, determined, willing to do anything for the people you love." I thought about Lily, lying in that hospital bed, about the 3 jobs I worked to pay for her treatment, about accepting Maxwell's insane proposal because I was desperate to save her. "How long have you been looking for me?" I asked. 23 years. Sebastian said simply, "I've had people in every major city. every hospital, every school system, looking for a girl named Hope Mitchell, who would have been 5 years old in 1999. Maxwell spoke up for the first time since the revelations began. "The cleaning company," he said slowly. "You've had people in security companies, haven't you? That's how you knew to approach me." Sebastian nodded. "I knew Hope worked in building maintenance somewhere in Chicago. I've been cultivating relationships with security firms and building management companies for years, hoping someone would mention her name. I felt sick. All those years of working, trying to stay invisible, trying to build a quiet life for Lily and me. And I'd been hunted the entire time by a grandfather I never knew existed. What do you want from me?" I asked. Sebastian's smile was gentle but terrifying. "I want you to come home," he said. "I want you to take your place as a Blackwood. I want to teach you everything your mother should have known about our family. And if I refuse..." The gentle smile disappeared. "You won't refuse," he said quietly. "Because you have a sister to think about, Lily, isn't it? Such a pretty girl. It would be a shame if something happened to interrupt her treatment." That's when I knew I was trapped. Sebastian Blackwood hadn't just found his lost granddaughter. He'd found his heir. The Blackwood estate in Lake Forest looked like something out of a Gothic novel. All stone towers and wrought iron gates that seemed designed to keep people in rather than out. As Sebastian's SUV pulled up the circular driveway, I pressed my face to the tinted window and tried to process that this fortress was supposedly my birthright. "Welcome home, granddaughter," Sebastian said softly. But the word home felt like a lie on his lips. Maxwell had tried to follow us from the penthouse, but Sebastian's men had made it clear that wasn't going to happen. The last thing I'd seen was Maxwell's face through the lobby windows, his expression a mixture of rage and helplessness that made my heart ache. Whatever was growing between us had been cut short before it could even begin. The mansion was even more imposing up close. Limestone walls rose 3 stories high, punctuated by narrow windows that looked like eyes watching everything that passed below. Ancient oak trees surrounded the property, their branches creating shadows that seemed to move even when there was no wind. "Lily," I said as we climbed the front steps. It was the first word I'd spoken during the 40-minute drive. "Where is she?" "Safe," Sebastian replied, which wasn't an answer. "She's receiving the best possible care, better than that public hospital could ever provide." The foyer was bigger than my entire apartment, with a chandelier that probably cost more than Lily's lifetime medical bills. Oil paintings lined the walls, stern-faced men and women who I realized with a chill were probably my ancestors, people who'd built their fortune on other people's misery. "Your room is ready," Sebastian said, gesturing toward a sweeping staircase. "Maria will show you up. We'll talk more tomorrow, after you've had time to process everything." "I want to see Lily first," I said, my voice echoing in the vast space. "Tomorrow," Sebastian repeated, and there was steel beneath the gentle tone. "She's sleeping. The doctors say she needs her rest." A woman appeared as if by magic. Maria. Presumably, she was maybe 50, with kind eyes and the sort of motherly presence that made you want to confess your sins, but even she seemed nervous around Sebastian. "Miss Hope," she said with a slight accent, "I'll take you to your room." The bedroom they'd prepared for me was larger than most people's living rooms. 4-poster bed with silk sheets, a sitting area with antique furniture, and French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the grounds. It was beautiful and luxurious, and felt exactly like the prison cell it was meant to be. After Maria left, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to make sense of what had happened. 12 hours ago, I'd been Hope Mitchell, cleaning lady extraordinaire, whose biggest worry was making rent. Now I was Hope Blackwood, heiress to a criminal empire, and my little sister was being held somewhere as insurance for my good behavior. I walked to the French doors and looked out at the grounds. Security cameras were positioned at regular intervals, and I could see at least 2 guards patrolling the perimeter. Even if I could figure out where Lily was being held, there was no way I could get to her on my own. That's when I noticed the boxes stacked in the corner of the room. They were old cardboard boxes, the kind you might find in someone's attic, with Rebecca written on each one in faded marker. My hands were shaking as I opened the first one. Photographs, hundreds of them, chronicling a life I'd never known my mother had lived. Rebecca as a little girl, riding a pony on these same grounds. Rebecca as a teenager, dressed for what looked like a debutante ball. Rebecca in her late teens, rebellious and beautiful, with that same stubborn set to her jaw that I saw in my own mirror every morning. But it was the last photo in the stack that made me gasp. Rebecca holding a baby, me, outside a small house I didn't recognize. She looked tired but happy, and written on the back in her handwriting were the words, "Hope's first birthday, finally free." The second box contained letters, love letters from someone named Arthur, addressed to Rebecca at a P.O. box in downtown Chicago. As I read them, a story began to emerge. Arthur Coleman was a chemist, working for some pharmaceutical company. He'd fallen in love with my mother after she'd run away from home. The letters spoke of plans to leave Chicago together, to start fresh somewhere Sebastian would never find them. But the letters stopped abruptly when I would have been about 4 years old. The third box was full of legal documents, medical records, and what looked like research notes in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Most of it was over my head. Chemical formulas and drug trials and FDA reports. But one name kept appearing. Harrison Sterling Pharmaceuticals, Maxwell's company. I was still trying to piece together what that meant when Maria knocked on the door. "Miss Hope, Mr. Blackwood would like to see you in his study." Sebastian's study was exactly what you'd expect from a crime lord. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, and enough books to stock a small library. He was standing behind his desk when I entered, holding what looked like another photograph. "You found Rebecca's things," he said. It wasn't a question. "Some of them. Why did you keep all this?" "Hope," he said, and his voice was gentler than I'd heard it all night. "Your mother was my only child. When she died, those boxes were all I had left of her. I've read every letter, looked at every photograph 1,000 times, trying to understand where I went wrong." He handed me the photograph he'd been holding. It showed Rebecca at maybe 16, standing next to a man who could only be Sebastian. They were both smiling, and he had his arm around her shoulders in a gesture of pure paternal pride. "She loved you," I said quietly. "And I loved her, more than my own life." His voice cracked slightly. "Which is why I let her go, and why I spent 23 years trying to find the granddaughter I failed to protect." "What happened to Arthur?" I asked. Sebastian's expression darkened. Arthur Coleman was a good man who got caught up in something bigger than he understood. He was trying to expose some very dangerous people when he disappeared. "Disappeared? Murdered," Sebastian said bluntly. "By the same people who killed your mother." I sank into one of the leather chairs, feeling like the weight of family history was crushing me. "And now you want me to take over the family business? Continue the cycle. I want you to survive," Sebastian said fiercely. "The people who killed your parents are still out there. The only way to protect you, and Lily, is to make sure everyone knows you're under my protection. By turning me into you. By giving you the tools to fight back." He leaned forward, his green eyes intense. "Hope, the pharmaceutical industry isn't just about healing people. There are billions of dollars at stake, and some people will do anything to control that money. Your father figured that out. Your mother paid the price for his discovery." "My father?" Sebastian went very still. "What did I say?" "You said my father figured something out. Arthur was my father." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Sebastian nodded. "Arthur Coleman was your biological father. He and Rebecca were planning to marry when you were born, but..." He trailed off. "But what?" "But Arthur had a secret he didn't tell Rebecca until it was too late. He was already married, to Victoria Harrison Sterling." The room spun around me. "Maxwell's mother. Arthur Coleman was Maxwell Harrison Sterling's father too," Sebastian said quietly. "Which makes you and Maxwell half-siblings," I whispered. The fairy tale romance I'd started to believe in crumbled to dust. Maxwell wasn't my Prince Charming. He was my brother. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Maxwell's face, felt the way my heart had skipped when he looked at me like I was something precious. Now that feeling made me sick to my stomach. The connection I'd felt with him. The spark that had seemed so real. It had all been some twisted cosmic joke. I spent the dark hours going through the rest of Rebecca's boxes, desperate to find something that would make Sebastian's revelation less horrific. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe Arthur Coleman was a common name, and my father was a different Arthur Coleman entirely. But the evidence was all there, laid out in letters and documents like a roadmap to heartbreak. Arthur had met my mother 2 years after his marriage to Victoria Harrison. Sterling had fallen apart. He'd been separated, living alone in a small apartment in Lincoln Park, when Rebecca literally ran into him outside a pharmacy where she was trying to fill a prescription with a fake ID. She was so beautiful, he'd written in one letter, and so scared. When I asked her why she was using a false name, she broke down and told me everything, about running away from her father, about trying to build a life where no one could find her. I knew I should have walked away, but I couldn't. She needed someone to protect her, and I needed someone to remind me what it felt like to be alive. Their relationship had been intense and secretive. Arthur knew that if Rebecca's father found her, she'd be forced back into a world she'd rejected, and Rebecca knew that Arthur's work in pharmaceuticals made him valuable to exactly the kind of people she was running from. What neither of them had known was that Arthur's research was going to put them both in danger. I found his research notes in the bottom of the third box, along with what looked like a safety deposit box key taped to the inside lid. The notes were mostly in chemical formulas I couldn't understand, but there were enough written observations to paint a terrifying picture. Arthur had been developing a new cancer treatment for Harrison Sterling Pharmaceuticals, something revolutionary, something that could save millions of lives. But he'd discovered that other pharmaceutical companies were deliberately suppressing similar research, bribing FDA officials, even arranging accidents for scientists who got too close to breakthrough treatments. They're not just selling medicine, he'd written in one margin note. They're selling hope and despair. They keep people sick longer to maximize profits, then sell the cure for whatever the market will bear. It's not healthcare. It's extortion. The final entry in his research journal was dated 3 days before he disappeared. Rebecca is pregnant. We're going to name the baby Hope, because that's what she represents. Hope for a better world. I have to finish this research before she's born. I have to make sure Hope grows up in a world where medicine is about healing, not profit. I've hidden the evidence where only Rebecca can find it. If something happens to me, she'll know what to do. But something had happened to Arthur before he could tell Rebecca where he'd hidden the evidence. And something had happened to Rebecca before she could find it, which meant that for 23 years, the evidence that could expose a massive pharmaceutical conspiracy had been lost. I was still staring at Arthur's research notes when Maria knocked on my door at dawn. "Miss Hope, Mr. Blackwood would like you to join him for breakfast." I found Sebastian in a sunroom overlooking the gardens, reading the Chicago Tribune and drinking coffee from China that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He looked up when I entered, and I saw him taking in my rumpled clothes and probably obvious signs of a sleepless night. "You didn't rest well," he observed. "Hard to rest when your entire life gets turned upside down," I replied, sitting across from him at the small table Maria had set. "You found Arthur's research," Sebastian said, noticing the papers in my hand. "Did you know," I asked, "about what he was investigating?" Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, pouring himself more coffee with the careful movements of a man buying time to think. "I suspected," he said finally. "Arthur came to me about 6 months before he disappeared. He was scared, paranoid. He said he'd discovered something that could bring down half the pharmaceutical industry, but he needed protection while he gathered more evidence. And you said no." "I said yes," Sebastian replied, surprising me. "I agreed to protect him and Rebecca and their baby, but Arthur was impatient. He didn't want to wait for my security arrangements. He thought he could handle the situation himself. So you let him get killed." Sebastian's coffee cup clinked against the saucer as he set it down too hard. "I failed to protect him," he said quietly. "Just like I failed to protect Rebecca. Just like I almost failed to protect you." I looked down at Arthur's research notes, thinking about the safety deposit box key I'd found. He hid evidence somewhere, something that could expose the whole conspiracy. Where? I don't know, but Rebecca would have known. He said he'd hidden it where only she could find it. Sebastian leaned forward, his green eyes intense. "Hope. If that evidence still exists, it could change everything, not just for our family, but for millions of people who are being kept sick for profit. It could also get us all killed," I pointed out. "Which is why you need to understand the family business," Sebastian said. "The legitimate pharmaceutical companies won't move against us directly. Too much risk of exposure. But they'll hire people to do their dirty work. People who won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens their profits." I thought about Lily. somewhere in this house or another property, depending on machines and medications to keep her alive. Is that what happened to her? I asked. Is Lily sick because of something they did to our family? Sebastian's face went very still. What do you mean? I mean, is it really a coincidence that the daughter of two people who were murdered for threatening the pharmaceutical industry ends up with a rare form of leukemia that requires expensive experimental treatments? The silence that followed was answer enough. You think someone made her sick? Sebastian said. It wasn't a question. I think someone wanted to make sure I stayed distracted and desperate, I said. Someone who knew that as long as Lily needed expensive medical care, I'd never have the time or resources to ask questions about my parents' death. Sebastian stood up abruptly, walking to the windows overlooking his gardens. If that's true, he said quietly, then saving Lily isn't just about family. It's about justice. Then help me find Arthur's evidence, I said. Help me finish what my parents started. When Sebastian turned back to me, I saw something new in his expression. Not just the desperate love of a grandfather trying to protect his granddaughter, but the cold calculation of a man planning war. There's something else you need to know, he said. About Lily. My blood went cold. What about her? I ran her medical records after we brought her here, Hope. According to her birth certificate, Lily isn't your sister. The room tilted. What? She's your cousin. Rebecca had a sister I never told you about. A sister who died in childbirth, leaving behind a baby girl she'd named Lily. Everything I thought I knew about my family was falling apart again. Why didn't you tell me this yesterday? Because you weren't ready to hear it? And because it changes what we have to do next. Which is, Sebastian pulled out his phone and showed me a photo that made my heart stop. It was Lily, but not in a hospital bed. She was sitting in what looked like a laboratory, surrounded by computers and medical equipment, talking to someone in a white coat. Lily isn't just sick, Hope. She's brilliant, genius-level brilliant, and she's been helping my medical team analyze Arthur's research notes. I stared at the photo, trying to process what Sebastian was telling me. You mean she's been working on this the whole time? She's been working on finding a cure for her own condition, and in the process she's discovered something that could change everything. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was more complex and dangerous than anything I'd imagined. What did she find? Sebastian smiled. And for the first time since I'd met him, it was a smile of pure triumph. She found where Arthur hid the evidence. And Hope, it's not just evidence of a conspiracy, it's evidence of genocide. 3 days later, I was standing in front of a full-length mirror in what used to be my mother's bedroom, wearing a wedding dress I'd never chosen, preparing to marry a man I'd just discovered was my half-brother. If someone had told me this was how my life would turn out, I'd have recommended they switch to decaf. The dress was beautiful, I had to admit. Vintage lace and silk that had belonged to my grandmother, Sebastian's wife, who died when my mother was young. Maria had altered it to fit me perfectly, and when I looked in the mirror, I could see Rebecca staring back at me. The resemblance was so strong it was unsettling. You look exactly like she did on her 16th birthday, Sebastian said from the doorway. He was holding another one of those old photographs. That was the last time I saw her truly happy. This is insane, I said, turning away from my reflection. You know Maxwell and I can't actually get married. It's not just wrong. It's illegal. The marriage certificate will be falsified, Sebastian said dismissively. The ceremony is just for show. What matters is that certain people believe you and Maxwell are united, that our families are now connected, and what happens after the show when people start asking questions. Sebastian's smile was cold. After tonight, there won't be anyone left to ask questions. The casual way he said it made my blood freeze. What do you mean? I mean that the people who killed your parents, who made Lily sick, who've been poisoning the pharmaceutical industry for decades, they're all going to be at your wedding. I sank into the antique chair by the window, the weight of the wedding dress suddenly feeling like it was crushing me. You're using my wedding as a trap. I'm using your wedding as justice, Sebastian corrected. Lily found Arthur's evidence 3 days ago. Everything your father gathered about the conspiracy. All the proof we need to expose them. But they know we found it. They're desperate now, which makes them dangerous. So instead of going to the authorities are compromised, Sebastian interrupted. Half the FDA officials are on their payroll. 3 federal judges, 2 senators, and God knows how many local politicians. The only way to stop them is to eliminate them. You mean murder them? I mean protect my family. Sebastian's voice hardened. Hope. These people killed your parents and made your cousins sick to keep you distracted and powerless. They've killed thousands of patients by suppressing cures and promoting treatments that keep people sick longer, if stopping them requires extreme measures. So be it. I thought about Lily, brilliant and dying, working around the clock to find a cure not just for herself, but for everyone like her. I thought about all the families like ours, bankrupting themselves trying to save loved ones, while pharmaceutical executives got rich off their desperation. What about Maxwell? I asked. Does he know the real plan? Sebastian's expression softened slightly. Maxwell is complicated. His mother's family built Harrison Sterling legitimately. But after Arthur died, the company was taken over by the same consortium that's been manipulating the industry. Maxwell inherited a poisoned legacy. So he's innocent. Maxwell is exactly what he appears to be. A good man trying to run an ethical company in an unethical industry, which is why he's been targeted for elimination. A knock on the door interrupted us. Maria entered, carrying a small jewelry box. It's time, Miss Hope, she said gently. The guests are arriving. Sebastian opened the jewelry box, revealing a necklace that took my breath away. It was obviously antique, with emeralds the same color as my eyes set in intricate gold work. This was your grandmother's, he said, moving behind me to fasten it around my neck. And your mother's. Now it's yours. As the cool metal settled against my skin, I felt the weight of generations of Blackwood women who'd worn it before me. Women who'd made impossible choices in impossible circumstances. Women who'd survived by being stronger than the world tried to make them. What happens to Lily after tonight? I asked. Lily will be free to live whatever life she chooses, Sebastian said. The cure she's been working on, she's found it, Hope, not just for her condition, but for dozens of other diseases that have been deliberately kept incurable. After tonight, she'll have the resources to make sure those cures reach the people who need them. The ceremony was being held in the estate's chapel, a small stone building that had probably witnessed centuries of Blackwood family milestones. As Maria led me down the flagstone path, I could see cars arriving, expensive cars filled with people I was supposed to smile at while Sebastian planned their deaths. Maxwell was waiting at the altar, looking handsome and miserable in a black tuxedo. When our eyes met, I saw the same confusion and guilt I was feeling. We both knew this was wrong on so many levels, but we were both trapped by circumstances beyond our control. You look beautiful, he whispered when I reached his side. Thank you, I whispered back. Maxwell, there are things you don't know about tonight, about what Sebastian is planning. I know enough, he said quietly. I know that if we don't play our parts perfectly, people are going to die, starting with us. The officiant was one of Sebastian's people, not a real minister, which somehow made the whole farce even more surreal. As he began the ceremony, I looked out at the guests and tried to identify the people Sebastian planned to eliminate. There was Dr. Harrison Wells, the FDA official who'd been blocking Lily's experimental treatments, Margaret Sinclair, the pharmaceutical executive who'd been pushing for legislation that would make generic drugs illegal, Thomas Kozlov, and my blood went cold when I heard that name, remembering Sebastian saying the Kozlov family had killed my mother. Do you, Hope, take Maxwell to be your husband? The fake officiant asked. I looked into Maxwell's gray eyes and saw my father looking back at me, Arthur Coleman's eyes, passed down to both his children. Whatever else was lies and manipulation, that connection was real. I do, I said, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with marriage. Do you, Maxwell, take Hope to be your wife? Maxwell's hand tightened on mine. I do, he said, and I heard the promise beneath the words. Whatever happened tonight, we'd face it together. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and Maxwell kissed me gently on the forehead, a brotherly kiss that somehow felt more intimate than any passionate embrace. As applause filled the chapel, I caught Sebastian's eye. He nodded once, and I saw him signal someone near the back of the room. The reception was about to begin, and with it, Sebastian's version of justice. But as we walked back down the aisle as fake husband and wife, real siblings, unlikely allies, I had no idea that Lily was at that very moment putting a plan of her own into motion. a plan that would save everyone Sebastian wanted to kill, expose the conspiracy without bloodshed, and give me the choice I'd never had before, the choice between revenge and redemption. The reception was in full swing when everything went to hell. Sebastian had spared no expense. Crystal chandeliers, tables draped in silk, enough champagne to float a yacht. It looked like a fairy tale wedding, which made the underlying threat of violence even more surreal. I stood next to Maxwell, playing the happy bride while watching my grandfather work the room like a spider preparing to spring his web. Dr. Wells was holding court near the bar, completely oblivious to the fact that Sebastian had him marked for death. Margaret Sinclair was laughing at something Thomas Kozlov had said, her diamond earrings catching the light. They all looked so normal, so human. It was hard to reconcile these people with the monsters Sebastian claimed they were. "This feels like the last scene of a mob movie," Maxwell murmured in my ear as we watched Sebastian charm another group of pharmaceutical executives. "The kind where everyone gets shot during the wedding dance," I whispered back. "Exactly. That's when I saw him. A man in a server's uniform moving through the crowd with the focused intensity of someone who definitely wasn't there to refill wine glasses. Sebastian's people, getting into position." "Maxwell," I said quietly, "we need to get out of here now." But before he could answer, the chapel doors burst open with a crash that silenced the entire reception. Lily stood in the doorway, and I barely recognized her. Gone was the frail, sickly girl I'd been fighting to save. This Lily looked strong, determined, and absolutely furious. Her hair had grown back from the chemo, dark and thick like our mother's. She was wearing jeans and a Chicago Bulls t-shirt instead of a hospital gown, and she was carrying what looked like a laptop bag. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice carrying across the stunned reception. "Everyone needs to stop right now." Sebastian went rigid. "Lily, you're supposed to be resting. Get back to your room immediately." "I'm done taking orders from you, Grandpa," Lily said, and the word grandpa came out like a curse. She strode into the reception hall like she owned it, which I guess in a way she did. "And I'm definitely done letting you turn my family into murderers." The guests were murmuring now, confusion rippling through the crowd. Dr. Wells had put down his champagne, and Margaret Sinclair was edging toward the exit. They could sense the tension even if they didn't understand it. "How did you get out of the medical wing?" Sebastian demanded. Lily smiled, and it was pure mischief. "Turns out your security system has some serious vulnerabilities. Also, your head of security has a 17-year-old daughter who's way better at hacking than he is. Maria's granddaughter says hi, by the way." I wanted to laugh, despite everything. Only Lily could escape from a high-security compound by making friends with the guards' kids. "You need to leave," Sebastian said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now, before you see something that will give you nightmares." "The only nightmare here is you," Lily shot back. "Did you really think I was going to let you massacre a chapel full of people? Even if they deserve it." "They killed your parents," Sebastian snarled. "They made you sick. They've destroyed thousands of lives for profit, and killing them won't bring anyone back." Lily's voice cracked with emotion. "It'll just make us like them." She opened her laptop bag and pulled out a thick folder. "Besides, there's a better way." "What are you talking about?" I asked. Stepping forward, Lily looked at me with eyes that held wisdom no 23-year-old should have. "Arthur, our father. He was smarter than anyone gave him credit for. The evidence he hid. It wasn't just about the conspiracy. It was about how to stop it." She held up a small device that looked like a thumb drive. "Everything is on here. Names, dates, financial records, recorded conversations. But more than that, it's got the formulas for every cure they've been suppressing, every treatment they've been withholding." Arthur figured out how to synthesize all of it. Sebastian's face had gone pale. "Where did you find that?" "In the place only a child would think to look," Lily said softly. "Remember Hope's favorite doll, the one with the music box inside?" Arthur hollowed out the music box and hid the drive there. "Rebecca must have given it to you when she fled, Hope. But you were too young to understand its significance." I gasped, remembering the old doll I'd treasured as a kid, the one that had been destroyed in a fire when I was 12. "Except, I saved the music box," I whispered. "It's in my apartment. I kept it because it reminded me of you." "Which is exactly what Arthur was counting on," Lily said. "He knew that eventually someone would think to look inside it. Someone who loved both of you enough to keep even the broken pieces. Thomas Kozlov stepped forward, his face hard. Give me that drive. I don't think so, Lily said cheerfully. See? While you've all been here eating fancy hors d'oeuvres and plotting each other's deaths, I've been uploading everything to about 50 different news outlets, medical journals, and law enforcement agencies. The whole story goes live in. She checked her watch. 37 minutes! The room erupted. Margaret Sinclair was screaming at Dr. Wells. Thomas Kozlov was shouting into his phone. And Sebastian's men were reaching inside their jackets for guns that weren't going to help them now. Unless, Lily continued, raising her voice above the chaos, everyone here agrees to my terms. What terms? Sebastian asked. Full immunity for Hope and Maxwell. They walk away from all of this, free and clear. Full pardons for Sebastian's organization in exchange for cooperation with the FBI investigation. And most importantly, she looked directly at the pharmaceutical executives. Every single suppressed cure gets released to the public domain, free forever. That's billions of dollars in lost revenue, Dr. Wells sputtered. That's millions of lives saved, Lily countered. Your choice, bankruptcy or prison, because those are your only options now. Maxwell grabbed my hand. She's giving us an out, he whispered. But I was staring at my cousin, my brilliant, brave, miraculous cousin, and realizing something that changed everything. Lily, I said slowly, you're not sick anymore, are you? She smiled sadly. I haven't been sick for 6 months. The treatment worked, but I needed everyone to think I was still dying so I could finish Arthur's work without interference. You let me think you were dying, I said, and my voice broke. I've been killing myself working 3 jobs, making desperate deals with billionaires and crime lords, all to save someone who was already saved. You saved me. Hope, Lily said softly. Not with money or medicine, but by loving me enough to never give up. That's what gave me the strength to save myself. And now I'm saving all of us. She turned to address the room. You have 35 minutes to decide. Take the deal, or spend the rest of your lives in federal prison. Oh, and Sebastian. She looked at our grandfather with eyes that held no forgiveness. If you ever threaten my family again, I'll make sure the world knows exactly how the great Sebastian Blackwood was outsmarted by a sick college kid with a laptop. As chaos erupted around us, as pharmaceutical executives fled and Sebastian's carefully laid plans crumbled, I realized that the little girl I'd spent my life trying to protect had grown up to be the strongest person I'd ever known, and she'd just saved us all. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of FBI agents, lawyers, and reporters camping outside the Blackwood estate. Lily's ultimatum had worked better than anyone expected. Faced with the choice between cooperation and life in prison, every single pharmaceutical executive at the wedding had rolled over faster than a dog wanting belly rubs. But it was the conversation I had with Lily the morning after that really changed everything. I found her in Sebastian's study, surrounded by boxes of documents and looking like she hadn't slept in days. She was still wearing those jeans and the Bulls t-shirt, but now she had thick-rimmed glasses perched on her nose and her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked exactly like what she was, a brilliant young woman who just brought down a multi-billion-dollar conspiracy. Hey, I said, settling into the chair across from Sebastian's desk. How are you feeling? Tired, she admitted, looking up from the laptop where she was typing what looked like a scientific paper. But good, really good. For the first time in years, I feel like I can actually breathe. I still can't believe you've been healthy for 6 months, I said. Why didn't you tell me? Lily's fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. Because I knew what you'd do. You'd have stopped working yourself to death, stopped being so desperate to save me that you'd do anything, including walking into Maxwell's office that night. You needed me to make that deal with Maxwell. I needed you to find Sebastian, Lily said quietly. Hope. I've known about our family for 3 years. Not the details, but enough. I knew Rebecca wasn't our mother's real name. I knew we came from money, from power. I also knew that someday, someone would come looking for us. I stared at her, trying to process what she was telling me. You've been planning this for 3 years. I've been preparing for this for 3 years, she corrected, learning everything I could about pharmaceuticals, about biochemistry, about the industry that killed our parents. When I got sick, it wasn't random. It was targeted, but instead of breaking me, it taught me how to fight back. She pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. Inside were medical records, test results, and what looked like genetic analyses. My leukemia wasn't natural, she said. Someone introduced a modified virus into my system when I was 18. It was designed to cause a specific type of cancer that would require expensive, experimental treatments that would keep you desperate and distracted for years. The blood drained from my face. Someone gave you cancer on purpose. Thomas Kozlov's people. They'd been watching us since we were kids, waiting for the right moment to strike. They knew that if they made me sick, you'd do anything to save me, including agreeing to clean buildings where you might eventually cross paths with people like Maxwell. But why target us at all? We were nobody. Lily smiled sadly. Because we were Arthur Coleman's daughters. Even if we didn't know it. Even if we'd never seen his research. They couldn't risk that someday we might ask the right questions. I thought about all those years of working multiple jobs, falling asleep at bus stops, crying over medical bills. So everything I went through, everything we went through, was orchestrated by people who wanted to keep us powerless, Lily finished. But here's the thing they didn't count on. Making me sick also made me angry. And when you make a genius angry, you better watch out. She opened another folder. This one filled with chemical formulas that made my head spin just looking at them. I didn't just cure my own cancer, Hope. I figured out how to cure dozens of different types. Arthur's research was brilliant, but it was incomplete. He'd identified the problems, but he hadn't found all the solutions. It took me 3 years, but I finished his work. And now everyone gets access to it, free, forever. Lily's eyes blazed with determination. Every cancer patient, every family going bankrupt trying to save someone they love, every person who's been told there's no hope, they're all going to get a second chance. There was a knock on the study door, and Maxwell entered. He looked exhausted but relieved, like someone who'd just had a massive weight lifted off his shoulders. The FBI wants to talk to all of us again, he said, but my lawyers think we're in the clear, especially after Lily's evidence helped them arrest 3 senators and half the FDA leadership. Lily grinned. I may have been a little thorough in my documentation. Maxwell sat down next to me, and I was struck again by how much he looked like Arthur Coleman in the photographs I'd found. Same gray eyes, same stubborn jawline. My half-brother, who I'd fallen for before I knew the truth. What happens now? I asked. Between us, I mean. Maxwell was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that, about how weird this all is, how wrong it felt when I thought we were married. Because we're siblings, I said. No, Maxwell said slowly, because we don't love each other that way. I looked at him, confused. What do you mean? I mean that what I felt for you in that penthouse, what made me want to protect you, it wasn't romantic love. It was something else, something deeper. Lily cleared her throat. Should I leave you two alone for this conversation? No, Maxwell said. You should hear this too. Because it affects all of us. He pulled out his own folder, this one filled with legal documents. I've been doing some research of my own since yesterday, about Arthur Coleman, about our family connection. He looked at me with eyes that held something I couldn't quite identify. Hope Arthur Coleman wasn't your biological father. The world tilted. What? Rebecca was pregnant when she met Arthur. Pregnant with you. Arthur knew you weren't his biological daughter, but he loved you anyway. He raised you as his own, gave you his name, protected you as if you were his blood. I stared at the DNA test results Maxwell was showing me, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then who? Your biological father was someone else entirely. Someone Rebecca never told Arthur about. Someone she was running from when she fled the Blackwood estate. Lily leaned forward. Do we know who? Maxwell nodded grimly. Detective Michael Thompson, Chicago PD. He was investigating Sebastian's organization when he met Rebecca. They had an affair. Rebecca got pregnant. And when Sebastian found out his daughter was involved with a cop, he had him killed, I whispered. And Rebecca ran, knowing that if Sebastian ever found out you were a cop's daughter, he'd kill you too. I sat back in my chair trying to process this latest revelation. So Maxwell and I aren't related at all. Not by blood, Maxwell confirmed. Which means you two can stop looking at each other like guilty puppies. Lily interrupted with a laugh. and start admitting that you're crazy about each other." She was right. The relief I felt wasn't just about not being related to Maxwell. It was about being free to feel what I'd been feeling since that first night in his office. A connection that had nothing to do with shared DNA and everything to do with shared values, shared strength, shared hope for something better. "There's one more thing," Maxwell said quietly. "Sebastian's been arrested, but before they took him away, he asked me to give you this." He handed me an envelope with my name written in Sebastian's careful script. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a key. "The safe deposit box." I breathed, recognizing the key from Arthur's research. The note was short. "Hope, your parents would be proud of the woman you've become. Use their legacy to build something better than what I created. Sebastian." As I held the key that would unlock the final pieces of Arthur and Rebecca's story, I realized that everything had led to this moment. All the pain, all the struggle, all the lies and revelations. They'd brought me here, to a place where I could choose what kind of future to build. And for the first time in my life, that future looked bright. 1 year later, I stood on the observation deck of the Harrison Sterling Tower, the same building where I used to clean floors at 3 a.m, and marveled at how completely my life had changed. The view was still breathtaking, but now I was seeing it as the CEO of the Hope Coleman Foundation, not as an exhausted cleaning lady counting quarters for gas money. The foundation occupied 3 entire floors of the tower. Now, what had once been sterile corporate offices had been transformed into research laboratories, patient consultation rooms, and administrative offices for the largest free cancer treatment program in the Midwest. The nameplate on my office door read, "Hope Thompson Harrison." I'd taken Maxwell's name when we got married for real 6 months ago, but I'd kept my father's name too. Detective Michael Thompson deserved to be remembered. "Lost in thought?" Maxwell asked, appearing beside me with 2 cups of coffee from the little cafe we'd installed on the 35th floor. "Just remembering," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully, thinking about how different everything is now. Maxwell followed my gaze out over Lake Michigan. "Better different or just different different?" I laughed. "Definitely better different. Though I have to admit, sometimes I miss the simplicity of it all, back when my biggest worry was whether I'd have enough quarters for the laundry. And now your biggest worry is whether we can expand the foundation to cover pediatric heart surgery," Maxwell said with a smile. He was right. The foundation had grown far beyond what any of us had imagined. Lily's research hadn't just provided cures for cancer. It had opened up entire new fields of treatment for genetic disorders, autoimmune diseases, and conditions that had been considered incurable for decades. What had started as a way to help families like mine had become a revolution in accessible healthcare. "Speaking of Lily," Maxwell said, "she called this morning. The Stockholm Committee wants her to come give a presentation next month." I shook my head in amazement. A Nobel Prize at 24. Rebecca would have been so proud. "She is proud," Maxwell said quietly. "Wherever she is, she's proud of both of you." We'd learned so much more about Rebecca in the months since Sebastian's arrest. The safe deposit box had contained not just Arthur's research, but letters Rebecca had written to me and Lily, letters she'd planned to give us when we were older, when we could understand the choices she'd made. Reading them had been like getting to know my mother for the first time, and it had helped heal wounds I didn't even know I was carrying. "Mr. Harrison Sterling, Mrs. Thompson Harrison." A voice behind us made us turn. It was Jennifer, my assistant, looking slightly out of breath from climbing the stairs. "There's someone here to see you. He says it's important." Maxwell and I exchanged glances. We weren't expecting anyone, and our security was usually pretty tight about unscheduled visitors. "Who is it?" I asked. "He says his name is Arthur Coleman, Jr., Jennifer said, "and that he's Hope's brother." The coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the marble floor. Maxwell steadied me as the words hit like a physical blow. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I don't have a brother." But even as I said it, I was remembering one of Rebecca's letters, a letter that had mentioned another child, another pregnancy that had ended tragically, or so I'd thought. We found him waiting in my office, and the resemblance was unmistakable. He had Rebecca's dark hair and green eyes, but something in his expression reminded me strongly of the photographs I'd seen of my father, the real Michael Thompson. He was maybe 30, wearing a police uniform that made my heart skip. "Hope," he said, standing up when we entered. I've been looking for you for a very long time. You're a cop, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Detective Arthur Coleman, Jr., Chicago PD, he said with a small smile. Though I go by AJ, named after the man who would have been my stepfather if things had turned out differently. Maxwell moved protectively closer to me. How do we know you're really who you say you are? AJ pulled out a worn photograph and handed it to me. It showed Rebecca, visibly pregnant, standing next to a man in a police uniform. The man looked exactly like AJ, just 25 years older. Rebecca and Michael Thompson had another child before you, AJ said gently. Me. But when Michael was killed, Rebecca was afraid that whoever had murdered him would come after both of us. So she gave me to Michael's partner and his wife to raise. Told them my father had died in the line of duty, which was true enough. I stared at the photograph, trying to process what he was telling me. You've known about me this whole time. Not exactly. I knew Michael Thompson had another child with a woman named Rebecca, but I thought you died in the fire with her. It wasn't until all the news reports about the pharmaceutical conspiracy that I realized Hope Mitchell might be Hope Thompson. And you're sure I couldn't finish the sentence. AJ pulled out a DNA test. I had it done as soon as I saw your picture in the Tribune. We're siblings. Hope, full siblings. The tears came then. Unstoppable and overwhelming. After spending my whole life thinking I was alone in the world except for Lily, discovering I had a brother, a living, breathing reminder of the parents I'd lost, was almost too much to bear. I'm sorry, I sobbed. I never thought I'd have family like this. Hey, AJ said, moving around the desk to pull me into a hug that felt like coming home. I've been waiting 30 years to meet my little sister. I'm not going anywhere. Maxwell handed me tissues while I tried to pull myself together. What do you do in the police department? He asked AJ. Internal affairs, AJ said with a grin that reminded me strongly of Lily. Turns out I inherited Dad's talent for rooting out corruption. I've been investigating dirty cops and crooked politicians for the last 8 years. Following in his footsteps, I said. Following in both their footsteps, AJ corrected. Michael fought corruption in law enforcement. Rebecca fought corruption in her family. I figure the least I can do is continue the family tradition. We talked for hours after that. AJ told me about growing up with the Colemans, about discovering his adoption when he was 16, about joining the police force to honor the father he'd never known. I told him about Lily, about Sebastian, about the foundation and everything we'd built from the ashes of our parents' sacrifice. There's something else, AJ said as the sun was setting over Lake Michigan. Something I found in Dad's old case files. He pulled out a thick folder. Michael Thompson was investigating more than just Sebastian's organization when he was killed. He was looking into a network of corrupt officials that went all the way to Washington. Political figures, federal judges, congressional representatives, all of them taking money to look the other way while people like Sebastian operated. And some of those people are still in power, still taking bribes, still helping criminals operate with impunity. AJ's expression was grim. The pharmaceutical conspiracy was just the tip of the iceberg. Maxwell and I looked at each other. We'd spent the last year building something beautiful, something hopeful. But if AJ was right, our work was far from over. What are you suggesting? Maxwell asked. AJ smiled, and for a moment, he looked exactly like Rebecca in those old photographs. I'm suggesting we finish what our parents started, all of us together. Use the Foundation's resources, the connections you've built, the evidence Dad gathered. Clean house from top to bottom. I thought about Rebecca and Michael, about Arthur Coleman, about Sebastian rotting in federal prison, while good people continued to suffer because of systemic corruption. I thought about Lily, brilliant and brave and determined to make the world better for everyone. Okay, I said. Let's do it. Let's finish what they started. As my brother smiled and Maxwell squeezed my hand, I realized that the girl who used to clean other people's dreams had finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes, to build something beautiful, you have to be willing to clean up the mess that came before.